Overwintering cannas. Now there are several ways to overwinter cannas. I'm going to show you quite a few different ways and how they compare, and show you the results in spring of which ones survived and which ones have done the best. So there's different ways I'm going to show you are: one, leave it in a pot like this and just drag it into the garage for a bit of protection from the frost. Second method is to dig up one of the pots, get the rhizomes out and wash these off and dry them out somewhat and leave these completely frost free in a cupboard. And the third method is the ones that are grown in the ground. I'm going to mulch them and see how they overwinter outside, and then in spring we'll see the results from the same species of canna. So here are my two pots of canna lilies, both in identical pots, both grown from seed this year, both grown to the same size and flowered, but going to be treated in two different ways for overwintering purposes. One will be left in the pot and just dragged into the garage, and the other one I'm going to dig up now, separate the clumps and store reasonably dry over winter. So first of all, I'm going to cut back the foliage. And then I'm going to dig up the clumps. So with all the foliage cut back, you can see there are 4 good plants in there. So the next stage is to dig them up. So that's the 4 canna plants dug up. The next stage is to wash off all the very heavy soil from around the roots. Now I've washed off the soil from around the cannas, and you can see the structure of these. So you've got the main stems coming up from these fleshy rhizomes down here, with the roots coming off those, and basically the spread by producing new rhizomes from the side of one of the older rhizomes. So the next job is to get a large pot or a tray or slatted tray, fill it with either sand or compost that's slightly moist, and plant these in so they're just up to about here. So the roots are just in, but you can still see the shoots and the top of the rhizomes poking at the top of the surface. So that's the next job. And the next thing I'm going to do is place the cannas in here and give them a dusting of sulphur dust all over the roots. That's just to prevent rot setting in. And I'll continue to place the other cannas in here. So that's all the canna rhizomes placed on top of the sharp sand and dusted over the roots and the tops with green sulphur powder. And the next stage is just to put some more sharp sand around the roots and the rhizomes. So here we have the cannas potted up in sand, with the sand going just below the lower edge of the rhizomes and covering all the roots. The sand is moist straight out of the bag. It needs to be kept damp throughout winter. Don't want to be soggy, but it does want to be damp to keep the nice rhizomes plump. Now we can use compost instead of sand, but an advantage of using sand is obviously it's much more free draining, so you can control the moisture in there, and it's a cleaner product. So if you're going to store this somewhere in a house, in a cellar, you're not going to have trouble with bugs and pests bothering in winter. And it's also easy to see if there's mould or fungus or rot setting in on these compared to dark compost. But either one is fine. If you don't have any sand, then use compost. Now this needs to be kept somewhere frost free. You can put it into a detached garage, which might be fine over winter, but it's not guaranteed. I've lost as many as I've saved in my detached garage, so I'm going to keep this somewhere frost-free, above 0 degrees. So I suggest you keep it in a cellar, in a garage that's attached to your house, or greenhouse. Greenhouse would probably be the best place, but if you don't have a heated greenhouse, then a cellar or spare room possibly. And so keep an eye on them, make sure it doesn't get below freezing. And that's it. And then in spring, you're ready to pot these up and away they'll grow. So here are some more cannas that have been blackened off by a touch of frost and the very drying winds we've had this autumn. And these will be left in the ground. It's the same species as we've been potting up and storing frost-free. So all I'll do with these is cut back the foliage to a few inches from the ground, maybe 2-3 inches up here, and then what I'll do, I'm going to cover all this soil with some mulch which will keep the frost off penetrating into the rhizomes. And next spring we'll see which of the 3 techniques has worked the best. So that's the full bed cleared of all the foliage from the cannas and the spent annual bedding. The next thing to do is mulch over them. So if we're getting a bit closer, you can see the cannas. This one with the red stem is the same type that was in the blue pots that I showed you earlier. And we've got some other types as well. So left a few inches. I'm proud of the surface. So I'm going to mulch over these with the simplest thing to do, which is just a garden soil. Just mound that over them. So now I've heaped soil a good 4 to 6 inches over the top of the cannas, and this soil will stay in place until next April, May, when it will be drawn back off there to the sides and the new shoots can grow quickly in May and June and have good sized plants by July. Now you don't have to go to all the trouble of digging them all up, washing off the soil and putting into a tray. You can just cut back the foliage, dig them up, leave all the soil around them like that, put it in a pot and keep that frost free over winter. One of the advantages of actually washing off all the compost like I did with the previous ones was you can see exactly how many plants you've got and you can store them in a much smaller area, whereas having lots of big pots full of cannas with all the soil around them like this does take up a lot of space. So that's pretty much why I'm going to wash off the soil for most of them. Just a space saving technique, and you can actually check them over winter much easier as they're just in sand or compost that's fresh.